And as always, a very warm welcome to this week's Life Issues. Well, you better not pout. You better not cry. You better not shout. I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town. And if the songs are to be believed, he might get stuck in the chimney. He might get caught kissing mommy. He might see you while you sleep, which is, let's be honest, a bit creepy. He might be asking Rudolph to light his way, and having made a list, he might be checking it twice. So spare a thought, won't you, for the little boy that Santa Claus forgot? Yes, that's the Nat King Cole song that we're sneaking in there as well. And actually, there is a whole lot, isn't there, in the image and the idea of Santa that we could explore, and how that imagery, well, reveals perhaps a fair bit about the attitudes and yearnings of society. So what do we think about him? Is he compatible with the reason for the season? What should Christians engage with, and what should they reject? And what should we tell our children? They are, like the weeds in my drive, the perennial questions that come back at this time of year. And every year there is some story about a killjoy Christian, usually a minister, who spoils Christmas by telling children. Well, actually, no, I'm not going to say it because I don't want to get the headlines this year. But on Life Issues, we don't shy away from the big questions. So today, in two parts, Santa. What does the history of the character tell us? How do we find a voice in the culture of contemporary Christmas? What do we say to our children? And who is the true father of Christmas? Alex Harris is the director of Baptist Planting at the St. Hilde's Centre for Church Planting. Becky Sedgwick is from Parenting for Faith. And I spoke to them about this idea of Santa and as to what we might say around him this Christmas. And before anything else, well, we may, Miracle on 34th Street like, call into question today the veracity of believing in that big, jolly man in the red suit with the white beard. So if you have little ears around... But Alex, can we start with some of the history? Because despite the suggestion that Coca-Cola invented Santa, he's been around for a long time and he's based in truth, isn't he?
Yeah, no, that's right, Paul. Father Christmas, Santa Claus, particularly Santa Claus, is based on a real historical figure. I mean, there's lots of legends and stories and additions that have been added on, but the heart of the Santa Claus character that we celebrate today and we enjoy so much actually is based on a historical figure, Saint Nicholas. We get Santa Claus from the Dutch Sinterklaas, which literally means Saint Nicholas. And this amazing individual, Nicholas, was born in about the 3rd or 4th century in Turkey. And actually his life and what he did is all the base story of Santa Claus today.
And he was a church leader and working in a community in Turkey. In terms of his actual ordinary, I mean, yes, there are lots of stories around them. We'll come to them in a moment. But in terms of his ordinary life, the things he believed, the things he taught, do we know much about that?
Yeah, we do actually. We know quite a bit. So we know that he was born in a really affluent and well-off family, but that tragically his parents died when he was very young. He and his siblings were very young when his parents died, and they were looked after by guardians. And those guardians passed on a Christian faith that had been his parents and passed it on to Nicholas. And then one of the things we know about him actually is he took that wealth, he inherited that family wealth, and during his 20s, he gave it all away. Almost all of it actually, and ended up living most of his life in relative poverty because of that. And he particularly gave it away to children. And because I guess to some extent he wasn't sure how children might spend cash if he gave them money. What he used to do was buy them clothes, and he used to hide in the clothes, particularly in the socks. He used to hide additional gifts and treats and sweets because at the time it was sort of wrong to give children who are in poverty to give them toys and to give them gifts. You give them clothes and you give them practical things, but actually Nicholas wanted to do both. And so he'd hide the gifts and toys in their socks and give it. So that's one of the things that we know about St. Nicholas during his 20s, which obviously you can see reflected now in the traditions we have of stockings and that kind of stuff. So he was this amazing redistributor of wealth and giver away of gifts.
And was he then a bit of a disruptor, a bit of a forward thinker? Because, I mean, the idea that there are some things you can give to the poor and there are some things you shouldn't give to the poor. I mean, now that's not exactly an unfamiliar concept within churches today, is it?
Yeah. No, you're right. And it was a bit of a disruptor. I mean, that's one example of it. As he got a little bit older, actually, his Christian faith was really full and recognized. He actually became a bishop, one of the first bishops people appointed to be a bishop. And he was known as a real kind of upsetter of the status quo within the church at the time. So his role as a bishop kind of oscillated. Sometimes he was in and sometimes he was out. You know, sometimes he had people's favor and sometimes he didn't. Some folk listening might even know the Nicene Creed, might have come across that kind of ancient document. He was actually at the council. He was one of the key people at the council that first wrote that Nicene Creed. And particularly, he was defending the deity of Jesus Christ. He was defending the fact that Jesus was both fully human and fully God. And at that point, he was quite an outlier with that. So there are stories that they kind of locked the doors on him and wouldn't let him in at one point. They had to sneak around the back and kind of get in on a back row to be part of these conversations. So he was a bit of a disruptive figure, yeah.
Yeah, but I suppose holding what many of us would consider to be a very sort of core Orthodox faith stance, and holding that sense of the divinity of Jesus and the full humanity of Jesus, and hold those things in tandem, actually essentially saying what would be the core message of our Christmas message now.
No, 100% actually, Paul. And what's interesting is Nicholas really strongly held to that idea that Jesus was fully, truly God, and in that sense transcendent, but actually truly, fully human and involved in the nitty-gritty of life. And Nicholas modeled that as well. His understanding of his Christian discipleship and his Christian leadership was, to spend significant time in prayer and contemplation and worship of Jesus as God, but also to roll up his sleeves and get dirt under his fingernails and be really involved in the nitty-gritty of life. One of the stories we have about Nicholas living out that Christian faith, and he's a brilliant example, for those who are exploring and wondering about Christian faith, Nicholas is a brilliant example of what it looks like lived out, But one of the stories we have of him was he had a particular passion for relieving women and young girls, freeing women and young girls who found themselves in slavery. And he was living at a time in a culture that women and young girls, didn't have the same kind of status or rights as men would. And he used to pay for their freedom, which caused all sorts of upset in society, disrupt the economic order, disrupt the way the world was meant to work. And again, one of the ways he did that, because they wouldn't allow him into the kind of the places, the kind of brothels and hostels where these young women and girls were, is when they hung out their laundry. There's stories that he used to sneak in the night and he'd put gold coins in their laundry, again in their socks or whatever it might be. And when they gathered it until they had enough money that they could buy their own freedom. And that's one of the stories. It's again, there's a few questions about, is it story, is it legend, but it captures his heart of wanting to kind of bring freedom. And I think it speaks to that understanding he had of Jesus, that Jesus, yes, was God, but he's right in the world with us.
Yes.
And Christmas is like that, We enter into Christmas. We invite Christmas into our homes, don't we, with Christmas trees and presents and family gatherings. And it's a way of kind of saying, yeah, there is a God in Jesus, but he's not just transcendent. He's right here in our everyday living, in our everyday lives, and is welcomed into every home.
So it was very much that his generosity, his sort of sense of social justice, his desire to emancipate those that were held back and restricted and give voice to the voiceless. And I suppose all the sort of concepts that the church would very much espouse to hold on to today. I mean, they were very much across the board. It wasn't just a nice old fella giving nice little presents to kiddies at Christmas.
No, not at all. Far from it. He's a great hero. He's a social reformer. He transformed how the church thought and functioned. He changed how society functioned. And he did it as a 20-year-old. He did it as a 30-year-old. He did it as a 40-year-old. Right the way across the lifespan. This consistent desire to do that.
It is perhaps a little ironic then that this character who was such a clear proclaimer of the true message of Christmas, it sounds like in all its facets, not just in Christ come down, but in terms of the working out of that reality and that redemptive power across daily life. It's more than a little ironic that his image today is often seen as the very antithesis of what Christmas is about.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, he's like a forgotten hero, isn't he? And, I have young kids. We love Christmas. We have 4 children. We love Christmas. And one of the things we've tried to do for them is bring more magic into Christmas by letting them into the story of St. Nicholas and kind of some of these real stories. And they love it. So we celebrate Father Christmas. We do presents, in many ways. We're like every household, and we delight in all of that. But also we have this wonderful extra layer we've tried to add of introducing our children to the legend, to the truths of Nicholas and where he came from. But yet it is remarkable how over time what was true about someone gets distorted and changed and developed, and we lose sight of some of the original characteristics that were so important.
I know one of the things that you are passionate about, and one of the things that you're very clear on, is the importance of us having a right attitude towards culture. And we are now stuck with this reality, this imagery of Santa as opposed to Saint Nicholas. And I think even in countries where the message, the history, the legend of St. Nicholas is still real and is still very, very poignant. I think even there, the, jolly red-faced guy with a white beard and a big red coat. I mean, it is everywhere. It is invidious. You can't get away from it. You can't avoid it. How do we determine, and not just in this, but across the board, I suppose, how do we determine as followers of Jesus, people of faith, the way in which we engage with the realities of the culture that are around us, like at Christmas?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And actually, I think to some extent, St. Nicholas helps us with this, but so does Jesus in the Bible. I think when we read the stories of Jesus in the Bible, we see Jesus respond to culture in one of 3 ways. Some things he outwardly rejects. He says, actually, I want nothing to do with that. I don't want to engage with that. And he pushes back on very strongly. Other things he seeks to accept. He kind of receives them as they are and says, actually, that is good and that is fine as is, and I'll receive that. And in lots of things, he seeks to redeem. He seeks to say, actually, there's elements in there that are good. There's elements that aren't so good. How can I redeem this and transform this? And for me, that's really helped me to approach questions around Christmas, questions around culture generally, is to say, is this something I just need to receive? It's just a good thing. I just receive it. Is this something to reject and to try and push back hard on? Or, and this is my preferred response, Paul, is to say, are there ways that we can redeem this? So with the Christmas story, and culture being saturated in the UK by Christmas, it's very hard to reject that. We just can't. Especially if you've got children, they're going to live it at school with their friends, and there's so much. It's fun, isn't it? There's lots of good things that we.
It is, and as I said earlier on, there's always every year there is some disparaging story somewhere in the news about some Christian minister that decided he was going to reject Christmas and tell the children the truth about Santa, and the world goes mad about it.
Well, of course the world does. I could understand why, but I think for me that then the Christian response to say, but how can I redeem some of these things? So how can I add to all the good things that are going on a real layer that points towards the real St. Nicholas, or points towards the story, the actual Christmas story about Jesus. What are the ways we can redeem this effectively and helpfully, and add an extra layer I guess add the miracle to the magic. That's the one of the things I often say at Christmas. It's magical, and particularly if you've got children, that's wonderful to make it magical. Don't reject the magical, but can you add the miraculous to it as well? Can you redeem it by pointing towards St. Nicholas as the root of the Santa Claus tradition? Can you redeem it by pointing to the story of Jesus, the gift of God that Jesus is, reflecting the gifts that we give one another, or the light of the world that Jesus is, reflecting the lights that we put round our trees, or whatever it might be. So I think redeeming Christmas for me is not about losing the magic, but it is about adding the miracle, and thinking about how we do that well.
But I suppose, I don't want to imply that we're all lazy, but I'm going to. But because I suppose for the vast majority of us, the path of least resistance is to either just blindly receive it and not make a fuss and just kind of validate all the slightly uncomfortable feelings about telling truth and all that sort of thing. Validate that by saying, well, it's just Christmas, it's just a bit of fun, isn't it? It's to go that way, or to coldly reject it. But there are some things that we do have to say, I will reject this, I won't engage with this. Just there are some things where we have to say, I will not just blindly receive it. I suppose what we have to do in saying this is kind of identify how we mark those parameters. How do you know what you can receive? How do you know what you have to reject? And how do you know what you can be creative with?
No, that's good. And I think a lot of this comes down to personal wisdom and personal decisions. It's about your family. It's about yourself. It's about the particular culture, like the place that you live and what's going on. We at the moment, we live in the center of a big city. The predominant community where we live is a Muslim community. So in terms of our immediate kind of culture and the people who live around us, Christmas is not a big deal. It is in the shops, but it's not a particular big deal in people's houses. So that changes how we approach it here. Whereas, go back 4 or 5 years, we lived in a different city, different place, where everyone did Christmas. Our immediate neighbours, their houses were covered in Christmas lights, and there was Christmas trees everywhere. And that changed how we did it. So I think we need to give each other liberty to have different responses. One family, one person will reject and redeem and receive different things to another. But I think your comment there, Paul, about our inherent laziness and choosing the path of least resistance, I think is insightful. I think if we are going to redeem things, it has to be intentional. Like it won't happen by mistake. We have to be active about it. And therefore, my advice would be just pick 1 or 2 parts of your Christmas to actively redeem. Don't try and overhaul everything you've ever done. Don't try and bring a miraculous story to every part of the magic of Christmas. Pick 1 or 2 things. So maybe this year you pick the stockings. Perhaps you hang stockings up, or the kids have pillowcases to shove their presents in, or whatever it might be. And perhaps you say, I'm going to help my children, my family, to realize that the original story of St. Nicholas, he would put gifts in poor people's stockings, and that's why we do it now. And you just redeem one small part of Christmas, but you've done it intentionally and helpfully. So that would be my comment. You've got to be intentional, and therefore just pick 1 or 2 things this year that you're going to redeem and give a bit more of the miraculous backstory to than just the magic of Christmas.
And in doing that, I suppose there's always a danger that the church gets accused that everything's about Jesus. And, it sounds like a squirrel, but it's church, so the answer must be Jesus. And it's finding a way to do that, and finding the opportunity to do that really brings the heart of the Christmas message, I suppose, is to tie back into St. Nicholas and the fact that he was able to hold both that spiritual and that practical, that social justice and that obedience and fervor for God's presence. He was able to hold those in tandem. And maybe that's the message that this modern society needs to hear about what Christmas should be about.
And wouldn't that be wonderful? Because what Nicholas is doing there, he's mimicking Jesus, who exactly the same was, Jesus modeled to us to have his head firmly in heaven and wonderfully connected with God, and his feet firmly on the earth and making a difference in everyday, ordinary lives. And that would be a great way to redeem Christmas, wouldn't it? To say, actually, this isn't just about us receiving gifts. It isn't just about me being fed and feasting. Actually, could Christmas this year be about something more wider? Who else can I help? Who can I benefit? I know lots of families have started doing like the reverse Advent calendar as a way of redeeming Christmas in this way. So instead of actually each day you open a little box and you get a chocolate, is each day you get your kids or your family to put into a box a gift for perhaps someone who's homeless or vulnerably housed or whatever it is. And by Christmas, you've actually gathered together a wonderfully helpful, provision, which then actually you can give out to perhaps those who don't have so much at Christmas. So it's one of the ways, and there's lots, where exactly like you said, we can redeem Christmas by saying, look, let's not make it only about me and me being celebrated, me getting food, me getting gifts. How can I make Christmas a bit more like it was originally intended, which was about Jesus and about other people? And how can I benefit, bless, help other people this Christmas?
So that's Alex Harris, and it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it, to look at things that way? Of course, the practical application of that, when you're talking to or around children, can be a bit more complex. So I spoke to Becky Sedgwicks. Becky is from Parenting for Faith. parentingforfaith.brf.org.uk is their website. And I asked her what she thought about how we talk about Santa to our children, and sometimes to our children's children. Because, Becky, is including Father Christmas in our Christmas culture simply harmless fantasy? Or are we actually deceiving our children by telling them a lie?
That is the most tricky question, isn't it? Because you'll find Christians that firmly believe that it's wrong, and you'll find Christians who really have no issue with Father Christmas. And so, they'll see it as like a bit of Christmas magic, a bit of make-believe, and it's there's no clear-cut answer, is there? And I think when I look back on my experience as a child, I think I knew that Father Christmas wasn't real, but I loved the magic. I remember now, I can feel the feeling of turning over first thing Christmas morning in my bed and feeling the weight of the stocking and knowing it arrived and the excitement of that. But it's utterly true, isn't it? That, if a child firmly believes that Father Christmas is real and then finds out he's not, particularly if he feels then the parents have confirmed that, that child may well feel lied to or even devastated that, this magical figure they've believed in and left, mince pies out for all these years isn't real. And I think there's also another little funny thing about Father Christmas, which I hadn't really considered until one of my colleagues pointed out, that one of their children thinks Father Christmas is quite scary. There's this person who knows everything about you who can magically get into your house, so, Father Christmas, there's no biblical answer to Father Christmas, laid out clearly. And I think we could sit and have a sort of nice debate all day about what should Christians do about Father Christmas. Is it a lie, or is it something that's just in the realm of make-believe, a bit of fancy, like if your foot touches the floor, the crocodile will get you. But I think ultimately this is, and we often say this at Parenting for Faith, this comes down to you as a parent of Karen knowing yourself and knowing your child. Because what's true for one child isn't always true for another. So some children might love the world of make-believe and be perfectly happy in that realm. Others may be very concrete thinkers and find the idea of Father Christmas not being real distressing. And so you make your decisions, don't you? As parents, God wants us to make decisions based on what we know of our children, So I think that you've got to take that into account. And I think
there are plenty of pitfalls. Well, there are plenty of pitfalls in it as well, though, aren't there? Because if you are going to, engage with the magic of it, and, even if in doing that, you're saying, well, we pretend about Father Christmas, which is what we did with our children. We pretend. For 3 out of the 4 of them, that wasn't a problem. For one of them, and I don't want to say he was particularly stroppy, As a 4-year-old, he went straight into nursery. He told all the other children, Father Christmas isn't real. And the furor that surrounded that. So there are pitfalls to be discovered. And of course, one of the pitfalls is that question of honesty and integrity. Because if I tell my children when they are little that Father Christmas is real, if I, like the prosecutor in Miracle on 34th Street, confirm that to them, and then I say, but he isn't really. It was just pretend. It was just well, what about God? What about Jesus? What about that? There is an issue of integrity in there, isn't that? Or am I overstating it? Because we make it a big thing in other areas.
There is an issue of integrity. And I think it's that balance. Is this, I think it depends on your approach. And we'll talk about how deeply you as a family go into Father Christmas. But, we have fantasy make-believe worlds in Narnia. It's more complicated than that, I think. And it is this really delicate thing of how do you, because even if you don't introduce your child to Father Christmas, they're going to get introduced to Father Christmas because nursery will be having Father Christmas delivering presents. Everybody else will firmly believe in it. Nobody at school will say it's not real because they'd lose their job, And so I think there's one thing I'd say about this is that I don't think we should reinforce the lie. So I think, as your child, many children come to you about age 4 or 5, 6, say, but how can he come down the chimney? We haven't even got a chimney. Yeah. Well, how can he go around the world? And I think at that point, for me, I think the key may be to go, oh, really, a bit of a twinkle in your eye. And what do you think? And let them unpack and discover that on their own. And not to reinforce the lie with lots. But he is real, he is real, he is real. Because it is. And I don't quite know how to navigate it well in the sense of, in terms of integrity, because is it a lie or isn't it a lie is the basic question.
And it is difficult to get that balance right. It is difficult to get that perspective right. But I think for many Christian parents and grandparents, the concern is that if we do reinforce the idea of Santa and then children discover it's not real, how does that confuse? I mean, how does the image of Santa confuse the idea of God anyway? Because the last thing we want them to do is get in their head that God is some big Santa Claus type figure who just gives out presents. The relationship is a lot more different than that. So is there a danger that children actually will confuse Father Christmas and God?
Well, I think there's, to some degree, I think probably we all confused them at some point. But if you did a list, you got a piece of paper and put attributes of Santa down one side and attributes of God on the other. There's a lot of similarities. They're eternal. They're omniscient. They know everything. They can be everywhere at the same time. And that you're already ticking these boxes. And the fourth attribute is they both judge.
Yes.
They both judge. And I think this is the thing. And of course, one of the problems with brain development in children is that they make connections. So a child has an experience of life and a bit of information, and they begin to put them together. And it's very easy for a child to put things together wrong. And part of our job as parents and carers is to spot that. And at Parenting Faith, we have something called a key tool of unwinding. We say, as your kids are growing up, they're going to make mistakes about God. He's angry when I sin, or he lives far, far away. And your job is to spot those and start to gently unwind them. And I think the big danger of the confusion of Father Christmas and God is the naughty and nice thing. Because Father Christmas rewards according to your actions. God gives us grace. And that's the difference, isn't it?
It is. And it also has the difference of, the unfairness around Santa Claus. I mean, that old Nat King Cole song, The Little Boy That Santa Claus Forgot. I mean, of course, the little boy didn't get the same number of presents as his peers playing in the street that day because his mom couldn't afford them. He didn't have a dad, single parent, single income. She couldn't afford to buy. And yet that reality and the unfairness for parents that have to splash the cash to buy the presents that Santa gets the credit for. I mean, that's a whole other counselling session perhaps that I need. But, though that unfairness that leaves children going, well, if Santa gives because you're good, I was good, didn't get. what was wrong. That can be a powerful thing for a child.
Yeah, and again, I think there's a lot of work parents might need to do in unpacking, and allowing children to understand that, this isn't the image of God. There's still injustice in this world, but one of the things we know ultimately is God will right the wrongs. Everything will be back as it's meant to be. And I think, one of the things you can do with children is to spot kind of potential misconceptions. If you're concerned that a child is thinking the nice and naughty list, well, God is only going to reward me or give me good things, I have to behave well for God. It's to teach them the concept of grace. If you see you're at the garden centre and there's the naughty and nice sort of poster that you can get up, or somebody references it on a TV program, you say, do you know, isn't it fantastic God isn't like Father Christmas?
Yes.
He doesn't just say, you have to behave well to get the good things I've got for me. He has good things for us, even if we mess up. We can just start to contrast Father Christmas and God in that simple way.
Do you think the whole sort of emphasis on Santa and perhaps the pervasive way in which it sneaks into virtually every conversation? I mean, you talked about making a list there, and immediately I started to think about checking it twice. It has become such a familiar part of our culture and our conversation at this time of year. Do you think that for Christian parents there is a danger that it takes the focus off Jesus as the reason for the season? How do we deal with that?
I think a good starting place is to turn the question round and say, what's it look like to put Jesus at the centre of the season? Because it's not just Father Christmas that takes our eyes off Jesus. We've got parties, we've got holidays, we've got presents, we've got all these things, films, time off. There's so many things that can distract from Jesus at Christmas. And Father Christmas can be part of that. But I think it's all about how much do you embrace Father Christmas? How big a part does he have to play in your Christmas? Now, we've got a garden centre in Rush, which is just, you go and it has the sensational grotto with real elves and massive presents, and there's Father Christmas's ponies waiting outside, and the kids queue for days to get in it. It's sensational. And, some families will embrace Father Christmas to the nth degree, or the elf on the shelf or something else. But it becomes the highlight of Christmas. There's snowy footprints when he arrives. We have to count down. We have to make our big lists. We have to post them up the chimney, and then he sends us a reply. For other families, he's a bit player. And I think there's the difference. What is the centre of Christmas? And Father Christmas, for me, can be a safe bit player in your Christmas. The danger comes is when he's so embraced that for the child, the magic and awe and wonder of Christmas rests on Father Christmas. And as Christians, we need to say the awe and wonder is Jesus. And we probably need to work harder at that, I think. But how can we say, whatever we think about Father Christmas, because it will be gifts or parties or films or toys or whatever it is, if we want Jesus to be the centre of the season, I think we need to kind of shift our understanding of Christmas a little bit. Because for me, Christmas is the incredible beginning of this ultimate change God makes. He comes and he says, Jesus comes as a baby, and he goes, and now everything's going to be different. And I want you to join with me in making the world different. In that love I bring down at Christmas, I want you to share out and demonstrate and give to other people so they can find it for themselves. And that's what Christmas is. So I think as families, can we start to look outwards a little bit more and say the reason for the season is Jesus. And so as a family, what can we do to be Jesus and to show people the reason for the season? I think when we start to do that, there's power in that is beyond just the act of doing it. You're empowering kids to change lives, whether that's inviting somebody over for Christmas lunch who would be on their own, or to go and help at a Salvation Army Christmas dinner, or do a reverse advent calendar, whatever it is. You're saying this is more significant than the frippery, if you like.
And Alex was saying to us that perhaps part of that is that we redefine Santa to recognize the historical example of Saint Nicholas, who didn't just give gifts, but was also interested in social justice and standing for the poor and so on and so forth. I suppose from your perspective, as someone who is about ensuring that children understand the principles of faith at Christmas, I mean, can we redefine the Santa image so that it ties in with the truth of Christmas, or with the plethora of stuff that there is around us and the films and the songs and all of that? Has that ship sailed?
I don't think so. I think we all enjoy kind of the indulgence of Christmas, don't we? But I think at the same time, and maybe more has become adults, but we become aware this is quite self-indulgent at the end of the day, and it's not very satisfying to be just indulged. We're not made just to sit around and sort of have grapes dropped into our mouth and do whatever. We are people God's given purpose, and we feel good when we shift things. And I think St. Nicholas is really helpful in that, particularly when you go beyond the kind of just the giving the money to the girls in the original story, but all the other stuff, the social action, social justice. My experience is children get very, very excited when they start to see that they can help bring transformation in the world and share God's love and everything else. So I think he's a really helpful character to talk about, not just this is the alternative Father Christmas, but this is the sort of stuff that God, world-changing stuff he's got for us to do, not just sing hymns. He's got purposes for us which are exciting and life-changing for us and for other people. So I think that can be really useful.
So a final thought then for those frustrated, worried, perhaps hesitant mums and dads and grannies and granddads, because sometimes it's harder for granny and granddad because you've got to take into account not just the child's response, but also the parents' response as to what gets said about Santa, don't you? What for you, and what, I suppose, with your parenting for faith hat on, what is your advice about how we start to navigate what can be a very thorny, very difficult, very confusing, and sometimes contentious reality? How can we navigate that so that we don't spoil yet another Christmas?
I think the first thing, and we'll always say this at Parenting Faith, you are the expert in your family. I think we started with that, and we'll finish with it too, really. Say, be confident that you can make good decisions for your family, knowing your family. And with something like Father Christmas, that might mean conversations with other members of the family. If you don't want to go down the Father Christmas gives all the presents at Christmas route, you may need to be quite clear. But with our kids, we're going to do it this way, and we really appreciate that if you could go along with that. And also be confident that might look like it's different from other families in your church. There's no one right way to parent for faith. We always say, you're taking account your own family, you make the decision that's best for your family. And that needs to be something you're comfortable with. And then, the reality is if your child's sort of under one, you can start to build your Christmas traditions without Father Christmas, but it won't be very long before he sneaks in, because they'll go to school, or, they'll see a film, or he'll be on the adverts. Father Christmas is there. So you will need to think about how you're going to frame that for your child, how you're going to talk about him, and particularly the big thing of, if your child is going to know that Father Christmas isn't real, how are you going to coach them in how to talk about that with others?
Yes,
because, there's a lot of bubbles to be burst at Christmas, aren't there? And you don't want your 4-year-old doing that. But I think for me, the key issue is, whatever your approach to Father Christmas, make sure that he isn't bigger than Jesus at Christmas. So look for some ways to create awe and wonder and magic that's associated with Jesus, not with Father Christmas. So, there are some really lovely opportunities in the Christmas season, One of the things I always did with my daughter from when she was 3 was we went to the midnight service at church because I love that. But in our church, there were flickering candles. There was the magic of being up late. There was the snuggling in the pew, being all sleepy. There was hearing the bells at midnight and knowing it was now Christmas. And that became part of our Christmas tradition, but it was always the thing she looked forward to, because staying up till midnight, you just don't get to do that as a kid, do you?
Yeah.
But you might decide that you're going to make reading the Christmas story, beautiful nativity story, but let's snuggle up on the sofa, put the candles on, have some lovely snacks, make it a really special time. So how can we create opportunities or things like, take them to a cathedral or another big church for a wonderful carol service or something. Help them find and take advantage of the opportunities to put Jesus at the center of the magicness. Even if you light your Advent candle, that can be a moment when you darken the room and it becomes a little moment of something. And again, that can also be in the serving. I remember as a student, I went and helped out at a Christmas crisis at Christmas sort of place, and all these homeless people had come in and we served dinner and stuff like that. And that, I still remember, that was my best bit of Christmas. There's lots of ways that we can try and find the awe and wonder and magic of Christmas in Jesus. And then I think it doesn't really matter so much, because the bit we want the kids to look forward and understand and find that awe and wonder is then based in Jesus, not in anything else at all.
The truth is, we live in a world where Christmas is saturated with Santa images. And if you believe the Christmas Chronicles, even Santa is fed up with being portrayed like that. But navigating what we say to our children, while being true to the principles of honesty and faithfulness and the true meaning of Christmas, well, it's not easy, is it? None of us want to spoil the fun. But making it a game of pretend can, as I said earlier, come with its own issues. The irony is that if society would actually focus on Santa Claus, St. Nicholas, we'd have a role model that not only looked to the true message of Christmas, but also to the responsibility that we all have to care for the needy. And perhaps in that is a key to how we navigate the Santa Claus question. You've been listening to UCB Life Issues. I'm Paul Hammond. Big thanks to Alex and Becky for their input this week. And thank you also to Alex, our producer, for this week. Why not join us next week for another Life Issues? Happy Christmas.